Hi, friends. I'm Olivia. This is AV Club, where I'm usually talking about books, horror, literary fiction, weird books. But today I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, something that's been on my mind, and that is just the general idea of immigration. This whole video is just my experience, my personal experience of moving from the US to Australia, not to speak about anyone else's experiences, but I want to talk a little bit about things that I didn't know before I decided to immigrate. I want to preface this by saying that it has been an immense privilege for me to be able to move to Australia, one that I do not take lightly, that I'm very grateful for, but it also hasn't been all easy. I think the idea of moving out of the US is on a lot of people's minds, and it is always kind of that refrain that you hear after an election or something bad happens about moving to Canada, as if it's that easy. And it is kind of a American individualistic mindset to just imagine that every country wants more Americans in it. The US kind of is a dumpster fire at the moment, but we also have to remember that there have been people indigenous to the Americas, to Turtle Island, for a long time, and they are not the people who have caused it to be this way. And I was moving from one colonized country to another colonized country, and that is also something that I keep in mind whenever I think about the ideas of immigration. And while I am a member of multiple marginalized communities, I'm also not one of the people most at risk for a lot of the violence that is going on in the US. So, with all that to preface it, this is going to be mostly a video about my pros and cons of moving from the US to Australia and just things to keep in mind if you're also thinking about immigrating. If you have any other questions about immigrating, please leave them below and I will answer them. I will make a follow-up video, whatever is needed to cover that. I'm going to start with my pros because the pros list way outweighs the cons of moving, for me at least, and moving to Australia specifically. One thing, if you're thinking about immigrating, is obviously you have to decide about where you would want to live. And for me, this is something that I've always considered since high school. Like, I've never felt like it was out of the question that I would move out of the country. Then it was kind of decided where I would move for me because I was in a long distance relationship with an Australian, and one of us had to move, and it made a lot more sense for me to move there than for him to move to the US. And very grateful that decision was made now. Some of the pros about moving for me have been things that were lacking in American society, things like healthcare. Like, it is so wonderful to live in a country where healthcare is guaranteed. Like, there are still some costs associated with healthcare. It is so nice to live in a place where life is valued. People behave differently in a place where life is valued. There's a lot of random acts of violence in the US that don't happen in other countries where life is valued. It still blows my mind. My partner had to go to the quick care the other day and it was just completely free. It still is not clicking fully. Americans have to pay hundreds of dollars a month just to have the luxury of going to a doctor where they then have to pay again. And it could still be costs that are life ruining. And because healthcare is tied to employment in America, people will frequently stick with jobs that they're not happy with because they don't want to have their healthcare up in the air whenever it can incur life ruining consequences really fast. There's just generally a healthier relationship with work in Australia. Leisure time is really valued. People don't treat work like it's their life. People do not think twice about taking off of work or think that they owe it to their boss to explain why they need to have a sick day or to be off. And that is something very strange to me as an American because that's the norm, to just feel anxiety about being able to take off work to take a sick day. I didn't even have sick days whenever I was working in the US. It was like 10 days off a year for any reason, including your sick days, even during COVID, everything. I mean, everything generally just feels a lot safer here. It's really sweet to see kids being able to really be kids, kids walking home from school and scootering around without supervision. There's just loose children everywhere, and like no one really seems to be worried about them. So I've decided not to be worried about them. It seems like kids are able to form more independence here and to do more risk assessment for themselves rather than being so dependent on their parents to do all of it for them. And honestly, I think this is probably the most beautiful country in the world. The land is incredible, and there is such a special feeling of being in the bush in country. I live in Gomeroi Country, and it is just so beautiful. I love being on the mountains. I love hiking. I love all the birds. Australia is just gorgeous. And anywhere you immigrate to, there are going to be a load of new experiences. For me, it's how many beaches there are, the little stuff like going to the grocery store here, not called the grocery store, and also the grocery stores in the mall. Um, Lots of really interesting things about Australia, all new foods to try. There's definitely a lot of missing foods, especially as a vegan, that there's not as much vegan food in Australia for whatever reason. I was already a Vegemite lover before I moved here, but there's a lot of new things that I love. I'm drinking way more tea than I ever have. I love an Arnott Spicky and a tea. Love a vegan sausage roll, love a vegan pie. Australia also has like these incredible Asian influences in the food. Food here is just really good. And then, yeah, it's definitely different from the Southern and Cajun food that I'm used to. But I'm so grateful to have so many new experiences. But obviously, there's also downsides to moving. One thing is being very far away from your family and friends. And if you're personally just thinking about immigrating, one thing that I didn't have to deal with is being able to navigate a new system alone because I was moving in with my partner who is Australian. And so this is all very familiar with him. It would be a lot more complicated if you were having to enter in a new system without any kind of support system in place. Immigrating is really expensive. And not just the cost of submitting for your visa, which is expensive. And I'm lucky to be on an independent skilled workers permanent residency visa. So I don't have to worry about renewing. I don't have to worry about it ending. I don't have to worry about living in a certain place. Those are all things to keep in mind if you're looking at visas. There's also limits on when you can get a visa. That the visas that I applied for at least required you to be of a certain age, that they want younger people in the country, they want healthy people in the country because it is a place with socialized healthcare to some extent. And so they don't want to be taking on the burden of people that they are expecting to cost them a lot of money. They want to get work years out of people. I mean, and that's their right. There's no reason that they should have to be accepting Americans in the country that they don't think are going to be beneficial when there's people who have been living, working here, and have already paid into the system. There's also so many things you have to do along the way, like police checks and health checks. And I was living in Lafayette, Louisiana, which is not a major metropolitan region. It's a, I guess, kind of small mid-sized city, and there's only certain doctors that are even able to sign off on your health examination. And so I had to go all the way to Houston to do mine. There was none in Louisiana. And so if you're in a state like Mississippi or Alabama, they're even further away. It's like there's like two in Texas, and the next nearest one was in Atlanta. Like, that's a lot of money to get there, a lot of time off work. It is really kind of a strenuous process. My process immigrating took even longer because it was during COVID, where Australia had very strict border policies and they weren't accepting any visas for years. And so it was a long time. It was 3.5 years that I didn't get to see my partner at all because there was no or limited travel in and out of Australia at that time. It also was not worth him risking getting COVID in the US and um, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that would have been because they do not insure it on travel insurance. It's also really challenging if you have pets. I have two cats, and the process to get cats into Australia is hard. It's probably the hardest country to get animals into because Australia is an island. It's very susceptible to invasive species, diseases, etc. running amok on a place that they've never been introduced to before. Like, for example, there is no rabies in Australia, no rabies at all. And so that was the main thing that took a really long time, over a year. It took me years to get my cats ready to move. And that's something that also pushed back my immigration timeline a lot. Imagine you're almost a year into getting your cats ready to move and they update the standards on what they require and you have to start the process over. I love my cats so much. You have to really love animals to get them into the country. Even after all that, there's a significant quarantine process. It's a lot. What I didn't know from the start is that you really have to go through a pet moving company, and they don't tell you that. But the pet moving company is the only place that will actually be able to get your cats into Melbourne. Yeah, the only place for cats to come into. is Melbourne, which is not in the state that I live in. I live in New South Wales, and there is exactly one airport that animals are allowed to go into in Victoria across the country. Across the country is kind of a stretch, but it's not close. One thing that surprised me is really how different the culture actually is. I have a lot of Australian online friends, and I had Australian online friends before I moved, and we all talked in basically the same way, so I didn't really anticipate that the culture was going to feel that much different. I also think that the social differences would not be as exaggerated if I wasn't from the South. If I was from the Midwest, it probably wouldn't be as striking. But where I lived in Louisiana, it was like you never met a stranger, that you could just start telling your life story to anyone on the street. People would tell theirs to you. Everyone is just really open and friendly. People in Australia, very nice and polite, but not very open, and generally kind of skeptical of people that are offering too much information. In that way, I find it kind of hard to make friends here because people aren't as likely to just strike up a conversation with the people around them. Also, the places where I would strike up conversations with people aren't places that are available in the town where I live. There's no communal tables at cafes here, there's no bars at the pub. So you kind of just already have to know people. At least that's what it feels like. And people are really nice. It's just a different way of communicating. I'm definitely a little bit quieter here because you don't get the same feedback, but sometimes it's hard to tell if people are even enjoying a conversation, and they'll be so flat faced, especially older people, and they'll suddenly reveal that they really were enjoying the whole interaction, but it's just different. I'm used to it now, but it did take me a while to not feel like everyone was mad at me. But probably the biggest cultural difference that I'm having difficulty with is that there's not really holidays in Australia. In the US, and especially in Louisiana, you are celebrating something every single month. Like the chef's kiss of October having Halloween, Thanksgiving, into Christmas, New Year's, Mardi Gras, Valentine's Day. They just like keep rolling. In Australia is just not very festive. For one thing, Christmas is in the middle of summer, and so where I was feeling like Christmas was the very romantic holiday of being around the fire, drinking hot cocoa, the sparkling lights, etc. Here it's like a picnic holiday. It's you go to the beach and have a barbecue, you're outside, it's sweaty. It's just a very different feel. And people do put up Christmas lights, but whenever the sun doesn't go down till 9 p.m., you don't really see them. Obviously, there's no Thanksgiving here, and Halloween. Halloween is growing here, but it is nothing like American Halloween. There's no cute, spooky decorations. There's less trick or treating. The kids drive around to trick or treating. They drive around to the specific houses where there's trick or treating. They can't just walk around a neighborhood. It is so sad. And unless you're from Louisiana, you're not celebrating Mardi Gras anyway. There's just such a long festive time in Louisiana where once you start celebrating for Halloween at the end of September, you don't stop celebrating something until like April after Easter's over. And so that's like a big change. It is a big cultural change. Obviously, the pros way outweigh the cons, and it's obviously easier for me as a white Anglo American to be moving into Australia, in a country that also privileges white Anglo experiences in a lot of ways, where I'm not having to deal with language differences or major cultural differences, really. Obviously, immigrating is like the best thing that's ever happened in my life, so I recommend it in that way, but there is a lot to think about. So if you have any questions about my experiences, I'd love to talk about all the differences in American and Australian culture that I've noticed, because there are many, many very funny ones. And I just want to talk a little bit about my experience today, because it also is hard looking at what's going on in the US and feeling like there's really no home to go home to. Australia definitely feels like my home as much as I feel like a stranger in it a lot of times. But yeah, if you have any questions for me, please leave them below and I will get to them. But I will talk to you all again very soon, and almost definitely talking about books. Talk to you later. Bye.